Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar series. Today we're going to talk about the overlooked art of briefing. How to brief your team so you can set them up for success, how you can create a call to action for execution, and how we can hit the ground running at an absolute sprint in 2017. I think the timing of this webinar is particularly appropriate because a lot of people listening to this conversation right now have gotten their annual objectives handed down to them, right? 2017 has just started. We've gotten our objectives. We're trying to create call to action for those. The briefing is a great way to mobilize your teams and start connecting some execution to your strategy. My name is Joel Neeb. My call sign or my nickname is Thor. You can connect with me either during this session or afterwards at Joel Thor Neeb on Twitter. I answer all the questions that I get there. And if there's a question that you didn't want to ask during this webinar, then you can feel free to reach out to me privately. This is me. For the first 17 years of my professional adult career, I spent that time flying aircraft in the military. So I was a fighter pilot and trainer pilot for those 17 years. And during that time period, I learned how to operate in a very dynamic, complex environment. I learned how to manage my team and make sure that we were effective in a world where we're flying twice the speed of sound. We got 3 or 4 wingmen that are 24 years old, and you're trying to make sure they don't run into each other or into the mountain that's inside of that cloud. And you've got 350 switches and instruments in front of you, and you're trying to manage this incredibly complex universe and figure out what are the 2, 3, maybe 4 things that we can affect at any given point in time, those critical few, to be successful. But I know your teams operate in the same environment. Your market is changing faster than ever before. If you joined the S&P 500, it used to be that you stayed there for about 30 years. So in other words, once you got on that list, you could milk the profits out of your products for a long time and keep that business going. Now it's 2 to 3 years that companies are staying on the S&P. And the reason is because we operate in a very complex universe. You and I do. You're in a world where the market's changing faster than ever before. We're in a world where the business cycle has moved from 7 years for a product to about 2 years before your competition can step up and take control of that product from you. And so in a world where things are moving faster than ever before, it's even more important to stay aligned as a team and to make sure that we have clear roles and responsibilities, and we have a way of staying agile in that environment. As the market continues to move faster and faster, we need to be able to respond to those changes to stay effective and to stay ahead of that rate of change. The way we do that in my world is through something called the flawless execution cycle. The flawless execution cycle is our iterative process that allows you to collaboratively plan, get together as a team, and have discussions about how to move forward with that group on a specific mission and a specific mission objective. Once that collaboration has taken place, you've gotten your team's buy-in, you've gotten a belief in the plan. Next, we're going to transition to the briefing, where we're going to focus our attention today. The briefing that allows us to kickstart activity and connect some action to the plan that you created. Once we're done with the briefing, we're in the execution phase, and we need to have a way to continuously update the team very quickly on the progress of the mission and any changes that need to take place for that mission that's occurring. And then finally, and probably the most powerful part of our flawless execution cycle, the debrief, where we pause, take a step, and look backwards at what's worked well within the organization, what hasn't, and then we make decisions as to how to leverage those best practices and avoid repeating mistakes into the future. Today, we're going to focus our attention on the briefing. How do we stay effective as a team and create that call to action so that we can execute flawlessly? So in the past 21 years of Afterburner's existence, we've asked nearly 2 million people how well they do the following 4 things. The exact same question to those 2 million people. If you participated with us in an event, you know this already. We've asked you already, how well do you plan, how well do you brief, how well do you execute, and how well do you debrief on a scale of 1 to 10. So 2 million people across the globe in every industry said on a scale of 1 to 10 that we execute at a 6.85 level. Meaning we're only at a level where we plan collaboratively, but we don't do it as effectively as we'd like. Team members are saying that on a scale of 1 to 10, we're pretty good at this, because we can certainly be better. We've asked them how well they brief, and on a scale of 1 to 10, they answered about a 5. 2 million people said we're about 50% on this one. And I think what they mean by that is, I'm not quite sure what the power of the briefing is. I'm not quite sure what you mean. I guess we kick off some of our projects with a big kickoff session, but we don't necessarily conduct a briefing. And not only that, I'm not quite sold on why I need to do a briefing, and that's the response we get from team members at that stage. In terms of execution, everyone thinks they execute well. When we ask them, how well do you execute, they say, you know, we may not plan a brief as well as we'd like, but almost an 8 out of 10 for 2 million people, they say we execute well enough to get the job done. And I think what they're really saying is they're good at reacting to problems. They're not good at being proactive. They're good at catching that dish right before it hits the floor. They're not good at executing as a team and creating a strategy and a strategic objective that they can meet together as a group. In terms of debriefing, on a scale of 1 to 10, they'd say we're about a 3.7 on that scale of 1 to 10. For me, that's surprising that it's so high over 21 years, and what I've seen is that number marching upwards, meaning a lot of people think that number should be lower, it should be 2 or 3, and if you asked us the same question 5 years ago, our data did show that it was probably a 2 or 3 for our self-assessment on debriefing. But nowadays, people are realizing, and the smart companies are coming to realize that if they want to succeed in the marketplace that's changing faster than ever, they have to figure out how to pause and identify best practices and become more effective as a team. So why brief? Well, first of all, it's a critical transition from planning to execution. We did strong collaboration in our planning phase. We had great conversations about how to make this team better. And we need at some point to make the transition over to execution. We can't continue doing these long meetings where we pontificate about what the team should do. Remember, if you used our planning process, it took you 4 to 6 hours to get the team together, get the buy-in, get their commitment, get the right plan in place. And that chaos of the 4 to 6 hour planning session needs to be quickly communicated to the team so we can have a call to action for their execution. Next thing I want to do is connect strategy to activity. When we talk to CEOs, they tell us that our number one challenge, the thing I wish we were better at, is we don't currently connect our strategy to execution. We got this great strategy, we're just not executing it on a day-to-day basis. The briefing is a great way to do this. The briefing is a great way to show that the planning process we use can actually be translated into activity. Dwight Eisenhower has a great quote that plans are nothing, planning is everything. And what he means by that is the active planning allows you to build the alignment and the commitment from your team members, but having a plan just in your hand means nothing. We haven't taken any action on that plan until we go into the execution phase, and the brief allows us to do that. Next, I want to compel the team to accountable execution. The key word there is accountable. I want the team to be held accountable for their execution and make sure they have clear ideas of what the roles and responsibilities are going to be for each team member. And then finally, I want to build a common mental model for the group. Here's what I mean by that. I'll give you 2 examples. One where it hasn't worked out well for teams and one where it's worked out very well. We'll very often hear from leaders, I don't need to share why this mission is important with the group. They already know that. I don't need to tell the team what they should be focusing on. They already have a clear picture of that. And when I hear that, I take that leader and I'll bring them in with a subordinate and I'll say to the subordinate, you tell us why this mission is important. You articulate why you think it is. And after they're done giving their answer, every single time, without fail, the leader looks at the subordinate and says, well, that's not quite right. That's almost right, but that's not quite what we're trying to accomplish here. And what that's pointing out is that we don't have a common mental model. We don't have a team that's aligned on what success looks like and what our clear plan is to achieve that. Our positive example is when I went down to Disney and worked with their Imagineers, the great innovative team, this group of people who build magic and delight people across the world. And we all know them for their creative capabilities, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of execution and activity that takes place to make them successful. And we're looking at one of their characters, and there's this huge version of the character that they had built. And in front of that was a little tiny version of that character. And I said to one of the Imagineers, what is that? Why do you have the tiny one along with the big one? And he said, well, the tiny version of the character is our visual for what the finished products should look like. That's our small-scale model so that we can all align on what success looks like at the end. And he thought about it for a second, and he said, you know what, that's pretty close to what your briefing is in the Afterburner flawless execution model. This is what allows us to have a common mental model and stay aligned as a group. This is their version of a brief. That common mental model allows them to execute as one team in a cohesive group. And then finally, it improves performance. If you brief with your team, I promise you it will improve performance for that group. How do I know this? Well, I've flown more than 2,500 missions. I flew with 25 allied countries across the globe, and I can go sit in on any brief in the world without knowing the pilots, without knowing their skill level, listen to the briefing, and I can tell you how well that mission will be flown based on the briefing. If there are any pilots in the audience, I promise you they'd agree with me. They'd say, yep, that's the biggest indicator for how well a mission will be flown, how well the brief actually takes place. The brief allows us to improve performance as a team. This is our opportunity to get that last-minute alignment so that we can go out there with clear roles and responsibilities to execute. So what is a brief? Well, first and foremost, it's not another meeting. It's not something that allows us to just have one more addition to our day. You guys already have extremely busy days. This is not a discussion. If you did the planning session, that was absolutely a discussion. That was collaborative. We needed to get all the insights. Well, the collaboration is over for the time being. And don't let that scare you. That's a good thing, because at some point we need to start executing. We need to decide on what we're going to do, and then we need to go out there and do it. The brief is the call to action. That's not another meeting, a very short session so that we can go out there and start executing. It's a process to communicate the key plan details. When you did the planning process, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of voices, and that's great for collaboration, that's great for innovation, but now we need to take all those key details and bring them front of mind for the entire team and help them to understand what the key aspects are going to be to move forward and be successful. And then finally, it's your final alignment. It's like a starter gun in a race. You showed up, you got your Nike clothes on, you got the right shoes, you got the right clothes, you prepped for this, you're ready to go, but your race hasn't started yet until that starter gun goes off. And what this shows your team is that unlike the other 19 things that we say we're going to do, this is actually the one thing that we are going to hold ourselves accountable to it. And we're going to use the briefing to make sure that we're holding the team accountable for it. It's like a huddle. The last second before a play is called in the NFL, before the Green Bay Packers go and win the Super Bowl, and Aaron Rodgers tells the team, I want you to do this, you run this way, here's the play that we're going to do, ready, break. It's not a discussion, it's a one-way conversation where the team gets that last second alignment before they go out and execute. So how do you prepare for this briefing? Well, the setting should be the same place, the same time, scheduled for 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes? Yep, you heard me right, 15 minutes. Put it in the same place and time so you can start to build some habit patterns around this. This needs to be habitual. You're trying to change people, and doing things that occur in the same place and the same time help them build those habits. For your preparation, I want to see slides prepared just like the ones I'm going to show you in a moment. Make some handouts, make sure all the key stakeholders are invited, and then do this. If you have to do this remotely, set up a phone conference for your team, just like we're doing on WebEx right now. This is one of the things you can do with remotely dispersed teams. If you've listened to my planning webinar, you know that we do not advocate that you do that with remotely dispersed teams. You need to be able to look your team members in the eyes to make sure that you have their buy-in, and that requires them to be present to get all their great insights. Not the case with the briefing. This is our first example where we can keep one team member in Spain and keep another one in Silicon Valley, and we can still have a great briefing and accomplish all the key things that we want to accomplish. But you do have to set up that conference in order for that to take place. So how does a briefing occur? Well, we are simple folk as Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and fighter pilots. We need to use simplicity to beat complexity, and so we use the BRIEF acronym. B will brief the scenario, the big picture. We'll restate the mission objective. We'll talk about what the top threats and resources were during planning. Then we'll talk about how we're going to execute the final plan. And finally, we'll finish it off with the contingencies and the plan review. So brief the scenario. This is the big picture. I want you to tell me why this mission is important. I want you to tell me how this aligns to strategy. I want you to give me the Simon Sinek why. Get me excited about this. What are we building? And spoiler alert, this is not about increasing net operating income by 2%. So if that's the only thing you've attached to your big picture here, then you got the wrong answer. You need to inspire your teams. So come up with a compelling why as to why they should participate on this one. Get them excited about it. Provide some context as to how their world will be better if they can do this, how they can build on some strategic objectives if they accomplish this mission, and emphasize how important it is. Take 2 to 3 minutes here. 2 to 3 minutes. Remember, the briefing only lasts 15 minutes. So this is roughly 20% of your entire presentation is going to be on the why. We always get pushback when we have our clients do this. Clients say, that's way too long. It's uncomfortable to talk that long about the why. And they say, I've already told them 3 times before. I shouldn't need to tell them again. Well, unfortunately, folks, Behavioral scientists tell us that until we've told somebody something about 7 times, they're not going to remember it. So instead of saying, I've already told them 3 times, flip that around and say, okay, 3 times done, I'm going to tell them 4 more before they're going to be able to actually articulate it themselves. The why is so important, so anchor here, because in a week when they have other things crop up that they want to focus on, your why that you articulate in this conversation is going to be the only thing that compels them to stay focused on this mission. Next, you want to restate the mission objective. This is the easy part. This should be clear, measurable, achievable. If you did your planning right, this should already support your aligned high-definition destination, and it should meet all the requirements for a good mission objective. Post a mission objective clearly in a prominent place in your work environment. So put it somewhere where everybody can see it. This is our new definition for success, at least in the short term. So get the team aligned to it. Make it exciting, make it fun, make this a competition to, as a team, accomplish this goal. Next up, identify your top threats and resources. The top threats create a sense of urgency for the group to act. And that's because we're reminding the team that success isn't guaranteed. Hey, there's a lot of stuff that we identified in the planning stage that showed that this was going to be a lot tougher than we initially thought. And these threats are very real, and they can stop us. So instead of being complacent, let's create a sense of urgency around action. On the flip side of that coin, it's also creating confidence in the plan, because it's reminding the team that we're not just running into this scenario, guns a-blazing, shooting from the hip. We actually had planned for some of the key threats that might take place, and the team members are going to be reminded that we've already taken into consideration some of the bad things that could happen during execution, and we planned around them. And then lastly, you're going to remind the team to alert you of new threats during execution. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. There will be pop-up threats. You will have to adapt and react for those, so make sure that you're identifying those new threats during execution. And then finally, talk about the top resources that you as a team are going to need to rely on. Next up, executing the final plan. This is where you spell out the clear roles and responsibilities. Who does what by when. You're going to talk about how each detailed course of action takes place to help achieve the mission objective. And I want you to do something here that in presentation 101 they told you not to. I want you to look at the screen and just read who, what, when as you go through this step. And that's because you are reiterating for the group, not only do they see it on the screen, they're hearing their name called out here, and the accountability is added into the scenario where everybody's going to get their portion of the job done to make sure that it takes place. Clear roles and responsibilities are articulated, and that's one person for each task. So resist the urge to put in a functional group like all sales team members or all R&D team members. That's one person that I get to go talk to ask how that task is going. Doesn't mean that one person executes everything, but I need to be able to only talk to one person for each task. And then finally, we want to talk about flexibility and contingencies. This is a key to agility during execution. We already know that the plan is going to have to be tweaked and have minor changes as the market environment changes around us. So let's create those changes and plan for them in contingencies. Review the initial triggers for those contingencies. And what you're doing here is you're building confidence with the team that are saying, yeah, this would be a great mission, but you know, there's so many unknowns that are still out there, and things could go a very different direction if that merger goes through in 3 weeks. And you're showing them that we took that into consideration. We have steps in place and initial actions in place if we do have to execute these contingency plans. Rules of engagement, one more time, I'm going to say it, 15 minutes max. I know it seems quick. It's supposed to be quick. You guys are in the execution phase now. No more pontificating. This isn't a discussion. You're in, you're out. 15 minutes is actually a little long. I strive for about 8 to 12 minutes on each of the briefings. No questions until the end. No interruptions. You're telling a story. You're telling the progress for this mission from start to finish, and the team needs to capture it that way. So tell them up front, no questions until the end. And then finally, use visual aids, because this is going to be a lot of information for them to take in quickly. Give them something to take away as key details for the plan. Put this up on the big screen. Share a video with team members that weren't present. Use visual aids to keep them on track. All right, there's no better teacher than watching this actually in action. So I'm going to go through a mission that is not an actual mission, but it's comprised of pieces of missions that we've done for about 20 different groups. And this is for sales teams. If you see this mission and it looks familiar to you, it deals with sales pipeline. This is our most commonly done mission with sales teams. So you're going to see the thing that we get tasked to do most often: how you fix pipeline for organizations that have a lot of activity in the latter half of the quarter and not sustainable pipeline for the rest of the year. We've probably done this 20 times across every industry that we've worked with. It's a very common challenge. So the team of the sales leaders, our champion, our strategic leader is Murph. That's the CEO, and then Thor's me. I am the ace for this mission. Ready for the brief. Here we go. Well, team, welcome to the sales leader briefing. You know, we all know that our goal, our strategic objective in the long term is to create a new execution rhythm for our widget sales teams that drives healthier pipeline and removes that end of quarter flail. We know how it goes right now at the end. Those last 2 weeks in the quarter, we still are missing 80% of our sales, and we kind of just close our eyes and run in a full sprint and hope that when we open our eyes again, we're past the finish line. And sometimes we are, sometimes we're not, sometimes stuff gets pushed over to the other quarter, but we don't do a really good job of maintaining this pipeline across the entire year. We need teams that work smarter, not harder. We need to be able to have a business with a sustainable execution rhythm instead of having this mad dash, this sprint at the last portion of our quarter and just operating on fingers crossed and hope that we get the pipeline to turn into sales to get above our numbers. We need to be more predictable. We need to create some forecasting capability for our teams. If we do this right, everyone will benefit. We're going to have team members that have predictable weeks. We're not spending the last 2 weeks pulling all-nighters and trying to be successful through just hard work. We're going to have a smart way to go after these, and we're going to have deliberate debriefs to figure out what the best practices are to pepper in throughout our entire quarter. So that's our strategic objective. Let's talk about what our mission objective is. We want to develop and deploy a standardized process to achieve qualified pipeline at 3 times our revenue forecasted by Q2 by March 31st, 2016. So what we're saying there is that by March 31st, I already need to have 3 times my revenue forecasted in potential sales pipeline for Q2. So if my revenue forecasted for Q2 is $100 million, then I need at least $300 million in the pipeline for Q2. And what I mean by qualified is it has to be assessed by the sales leader. This can't be pipeline that's bad pipeline when nobody's stuffing the pipeline with false things. This is actually assessed and qualified as real by the sales leaders. When we talked about this in the planning session yesterday, you said there's some top threats. You said, well, right now our roles aren't really well defined. We don't really know how to go out there and execute. We have one person that kind of runs ahead, and as a team, we don't execute well for our sales groups. Next thing you told us is we're probably not going to get there because there's just a lack of strong pipeline right now. It's a slow quarter. We can't overcome that, and so we're not going to be able to get 3 times pipeline. Other people said, we got current quarter distractions. You're still holding me accountable for selling everything in Q1, but you also want me to build the Q2 numbers at the same time. We've got a lack of clear forecasting, so I don't even really know what my numbers are for Q2 yet. And then you also said, it doesn't matter if we want to create this new sustainable rhythm where we're working all quarter. The rest of the business does this the same way, so we're not going to have op support. Everybody just anticipates that the last portion of the quarter will be a flail, and so that's what we're engineered to support. We said if we do want to achieve this, we got a VP of sales to lean in and endorse it. We can use sales team training to make sure we're all using the same best practices. We got to have pipeline inspection missions so we can stay ahead of the problems. We got to actually look at this. What gets measured gets managed, right? So we got to have out-quarter pipeline on our dashboard. And then he also said, let's throw together an incentive, a spiff for pipeline for this achievement. Here's the plan. I'm going to read you the plan so that it's crystal clear as to what the roles and responsibilities are to achieve our objective. Murph, sir, you're going to give a mission briefing to the entire sales team and release the spiff. That's going to be next Wednesday on January 25th. Sandra, you're going to create that out-quarter pipeline dial in Salesforce so we can make sure that we're actually looking at that starting January 27th. Gomez, I need you to look into and debrief with the successful teams and find those best practices with folks that are already creating this long-term pipeline and pockets of success. You got to do that by February 2nd. Gomez, next up, you need to create new standards for pipeline creation, so take those best practices, and I want you to standardize some activities so everybody gets to participate in those same best practices. That occurs by February 10th. Joe, you've got to release the new training syllabus so that we have time to train the folks up on these best practices. Coming out on Valentine's Day, they need to complete that within that week. Charles, you're going to conduct the first pipeline inspection session. That's going to start on Valentine's Day, and that's going to continue every week thereafter. So we're making sure that we actually have real pipeline in there, and we're not stuffing it with false pipeline. Ansley, I need you to identify the gaps and start assigning mentors. We need to bridge the gaps and make sure that the people that are falling behind get the same access to success and training as the folks that are doing well. That's on February 28th. And then I'm going to lead the stories of success and challenges session so that we can start to share some of the successes, build some momentum around that, as well as the challenges, so we can all see we're encountering some of the same challenges out there and how to overcome them. And then finally, of course, no mission is ever complete until we've debriefed it. And after the quarter end on March 31st, we're going to hit pause and we're going to look at what our debrief focus points are so we can get back together on April 7th and conduct a debrief. We said there were some contingencies, some uncontrollable threats. You told me that the biggest contingency that you had to face was this lack of strong inbound. It's a weak quarter. We're a seasonal business. Q2 is typically a weak time to build pipeline. And so we said, okay, that could happen. Let's look at what our initial actions will be if that takes place. So if we have less than 80% of our qualified leads halfway through this quarter, then we're going to implement our outbound referral plans, meaning we're going to start kickstarting marketing. We're going to start looking for other referrals, making sure that we have the right amount of inbound to turn that into sales pipeline. If you have a lack of ops support, meaning we go to those other groups, those functional groups within our company selling widgets, and we don't have the right support. So in other words, we have low inventory levels. We don't have the marketing team ready to support us right away. If that takes place, then I want Murph to engage with the ops leaders and make sure they understand how important this mission is. So the trigger for that is the safety stock interval levels. We'll know right away that we've gotten to dangerously low levels there. We're not going to be able to fulfill orders, and we're going to need to make sure that Murph engages with the team to keep everybody aligned. Folks, that's it. That's the mission. We're going to go out there and make sure we create new sales pipeline for the Q3 and Q2 that's going to allow us to have the sustainable pipeline, the sustainable execution rhythm. It's going to move us closer to our ultimate goal of having pipeline that exists throughout every quarter, to making sure that we don't have that last-minute flail during the last 2 weeks of every quarter when we come in exhausted from staying up all night and trying to close those last-minute deals. Any questions from the room? So that took me about 8 minutes, 9 minutes. That's an example of the briefing. And I promise this is just a coincidence, but we completed one of these missions that we started at the beginning of Q3 with a client and talked to them just yesterday. And they had a goal of increasing pipeline for Q1, so the time period we're in right now, by 3 times. And they hit 3.5x on their pipeline. So they blew their goal out of the water, and they blew their Q4 numbers out of the water as well. Folks, success is predictable. If you focus on the critical few things, if you focus your team on a few critical strategic objectives, you create a plan to execute it, you create a call to action for that plan through a briefing, and then you create a means of staying agile during execution, success is a logical byproduct from doing it. It may not happen right away, but you're going to debrief to figure out what is working, what isn't, pivot, iterate, and stay effective moving forward. All right, so before we go to Q&A, I want to make one more pitch for you reaching out to me. I love getting questions following these. I always get private questions that people don't want to disclose, business details to the rest of the group. Totally understand that. But reach out at thor@afterburner.com. I respond to every email that I get. Go check out our website, afterburner.com. We also have the number there as well if you want to talk in person. We want to be able to connect with you and continue the dialogue and hear about what challenges you're facing and what's going well. So at this point, we're going to open it up for Q&A. I know that we already have a couple of questions in the bank from folks that are listening. So go to that Q&A bank and start typing them in. And we'll move forward with any questions in the last 12 minutes of our discussion. So my lovely producer, Ansley, how about we start with the first question? What you got?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Our first question, how do you work around people inevitably making the brief a discussion?
Wow, great question. And I'll tell you what, this happens all the time. So the question is, how do you stop this from becoming a discussion? And that's a big challenge because a lot of these groups we work with, they have the culture of collaboration. And that's awesome. You want to have that, right? But at some point, you need to start executing. And you can't have that extrovert in the room that just continues dominating the conversation. And now we're 30 minutes into this. It was only supposed to last 15 minutes. We're late to our next meeting. We reopened the planning phase because now we're talking about how we're going to execute again. And it's just going in the wrong direction. So the way you do that is up front, you establish the ground rules. And you say, folks, this is going to be a story. I don't want any interruptions. I'm going to go through this very quickly. I'm only going to take up 9 minutes of your time, and then we get you out of here as fast as possible. If we have any questions after that we can't answer in 30 seconds or less, we're going to take those offline. I want the rest of the team to go out there and execute. We're not going to reopen planning. We're not going to reopen discussion. You guys did a great job in the planning stage. That's over with. Now we're in the execution phase, and we need to start moving. What's the next one?
The next question I just saw pop up was, are we going to share the slides? And yes, they will be on our slide share after this presentation, and that's Afterburner slide share, and we'll also be sending them out on Monday in an email. So our next question is, how do you know if the plan or effort should be briefed?
So how do you know if something should be briefed? When do they get the briefing treatment? Here's what I'd say to that. You should figure out what the critical few things are for your group and brief all of them. So that doesn't mean you're doing 20 briefings. That doesn't mean you're doing 20 missions. You should really only have 3 or 4 missions in flight with your small teams at any given point in time, and that's a lot. Typically, we go with about 2 to 3 missions per campaign, and if you do that, then there's no question you're going to brief it. I tell you what, if you don't brief it, if you decide it's not worth briefing, then the team's probably going to decide that you're really telling them it's not worth doing. And that if there's something else that they have that's a higher priority, they should focus their attention on that. And like I said at the beginning, every group has 20 things they could do. You need to emphasize the things that they should do and how to task shed and make sure they're not doing the other 17.
Great. Our next question is, how much detail is too much to discuss in the brief, pretty much?
Okay. So how much detail is too much detail for the brief? You guys saw me do the brief just now. That's about as much detail as I'd want. I don't want to go into the weeds. I don't want to hear the breathing steps. I don't want to hear how you parked in the parking lot and took 5 minutes to walk up here to go into the meeting. I want to see the high-level discussion. So as you go through that planning slide, you should practice doing it and getting the actual plan articulated in less than 3 or 4 minutes. And that's another thing I want to anchor on there. This is a great chance for professional development. Even if you're not in charge of teams, this is your opportunity to shine. I told you earlier that I can tell how well somebody will perform based on their briefing. If you get good at briefing and you're able to communicate things very simply and very quickly, that's a great indicator for future success. So even if you're not in charge of a team, anytime you're standing in front of your leadership, giving them an update on anything, use these same techniques to keep it succinct, to quickly communicate key details. And the tendency, everybody says, yeah, but I don't want to underdo it and not give them enough information. Fine, put 20 hidden slides in there, but keep the message down to less than 15 minutes, and I promise you, your leaders will appreciate it, and they're going to see you as somebody that can quickly communicate and simplify things. That's one of the most important things we can do in this day and age when we're all drowning in information, we're all drowning in data. Big data is really a 4-letter word because all that means is we have too much of it and we don't know what to look at. If you can wade through that and find the critical things to focus on and then clearly communicate it, that's a key skill set that's going to allow you to move ahead in the world.
Next question, how do you measure that the brief was successful, and what are short-term or long-term plans for the rebrief versus making adjustments on the run? Oh, I'm sorry, I mixed up too. There's so many coming in. Short-term and long-term results we will experience of the brief.
Great question. So here are the short-term results of the brief that you're going to have. People are going to push back and not want to show up at your briefing. You're going to have about 80% attendance. So get ahead of that threat right away and tell them, hey, folks, this one is not negotiable. I promise I won't take up much of your time. You can do it remotely, but I need you not to alt-tab over to your email. I need you to pay attention during the 9 minutes when we do this brief, and I need you to listen up because this is going to be our call to action. It's only going to be 15 minutes. Once we're done with that, I'm going to give you back to your day. The way you know that the briefing worked is that we're taking action on it, but you got to do the next step, which is to hold the team accountable and tell them when the upcoming progress check is. We call them XGAP meetings in my world. And a week after the briefing, you get the team back together for, no big surprise, spoiler alert, again, 15 minutes. I don't want to take up a lot of your time. And in 15 minutes, we're going to quickly communicate 2 things. The progress on the mission, and people are going to start to get excited because they're going to say, holy cow, we're actually doing this. This is actually getting done. And then 2, we're going to identify the threats that we got to mitigate as a team. So there will be pop-up threats. We got to figure out a way to mitigate those. And if you're doing a good job as a leader, you already know those answers and what you're going to do to mitigate those threats.
Is it ever appropriate to press pause during the execution phase to adjust the plan and rebrief versus making adjustments on the run?
Great question. So the question is, do we ever hit the reset button where we push pause and stop and replan? Yes, but that's a failure. That's a mission fail if you have to do that. Because we've obviously missed something so significant that we hadn't planned for. There's sometimes when the world changes around us and to such an extent that our mission becomes either irrelevant or we got the wrong plan to execute it. Of the 500 missions I've supported, I've seen that happen like 4 times. So even though we want to go to that as an excuse most of the time, the real reason why we had the wrong plan was because we didn't take into consideration all the key things we could have in the planning stage. That being said, yes, if you feel like you're going down the wrong path, it looks like the mission is going to be unsuccessful, go ugly early, cut the mission, stop it, do a quick debrief as well, and then go right back into the planning phase, figure out what your new objective is, and make sure that you can at least achieve that.
Do you get updates on the tasks outside of the brief? Are you only briefing on upcoming tasks?
So are you only briefing on upcoming tasks? Yes, so if I understand this question right, yes, you're only going to brief on the things that we're going to do during the mission. And we're going into the XGAP conversation, which I love because you're thinking, well, how do I keep this momentum going? But that's for a future webinar. The XGAPs are what allow us to, that's like the heartbeat of execution where everybody gets reinvigorated towards the mission, they see the progress, they're in and they're out in 15 minutes, and they've also heard the leader say, hey, we've had a pop-up threat, that merger that we were worried about that actually did take place, we're going to execute our contingency plan, here's the 2 new things we added to our plan. Any questions on that? Ready, break, let's go. And you're showing that you're able to stay agile in an ever-changing environment.
What do you feel is the main reason this step is missed?
The main reason it's missed, I think people just feel like we planned it. I mean, it's human nature. Our leaders say, I don't need to brief. We just got done doing the plan. I mean, everybody sat here and we talked about it for 6 hours. Why could I possibly have to bring those same people back in and talk to them for 15 minutes? The reason is because that great planning that you did was chaotic. And there's 6 hours of information. And it's chaotic in a good way because you're going to be able to leverage the playing field and get all the right information to get the wisdom of the crowd. But at the same time, everybody's remembering things a little bit differently from that 6-hour time period. You need to identify the key, most important takeaways from that plan and to be able to articulate them clearly to the group in that briefing stage. A lot of leaders like to skip that because they feel like the team should already know. It goes back to that, I've already told them, why should I have to tell them again? Well, 7 times is the minimum, so just get used to it. That's human. That's how we're built.
If everyone is part of the planning process, how important is it for everyone to be at the brief?
So that kind of segues with my last question, which if everyone is already there at the plan, is it really that important for them to be there at the brief? Absolutely. I would never go fly without a briefing. I would never do a mission without a briefing. It's designed to be short. It's that last-second huddle. You would never have somebody sitting on the sidelines when the Green Bay Packers are getting ready to do a play and that person not be in the huddle. We need to make sure we have that alignment and there's clear roles and responsibilities before we go execute.
How do you involve the owners of the company that this is important to?
So great question. We get this one all the time. So it is, how do we make sure that the owners of the company know that this is important? You could ask this question about anything we do because I bet they don't debrief as well as you'd like them to. I bet they don't have clear strategies as well as you'd like them to and strategic objectives. But here's the good news. If you can start creating these behaviors, this is like a spotlight that shines upward. And it's a forcing function that shows the leadership, hey, we got a pocket of success going on over here. And it seems like the only thing holding them back right now is us. Like they're going off on this mission and they're doing great things, but we don't brief, we don't debrief, we don't have discipline around how we roll out our strategy. I think we got to tighten our act up too. So it's a great way to show the leadership that we have our stuff together at our level. Now we need to make sure that that cascades in all directions.
And we'll do one more before we have to leave. How do you catch up with the team after the brief to ensure that they are still on track?
So the question is, how do you catch up with the team after the brief to ensure that they're on track? It definitely comes down to that XGAP session again. If you did the briefing right, you shouldn't have to go question them all and make sure that they're all still on board with this. The briefing is designed so that they can just go out and execute. You don't have to babysit them. You have 1 week before the next time you get back together. The next activity, you'll hear this in the follow-on webinar about XGAPs, is about 2 days before that XGAP takes place, you start talking to the people who are responsible for the first courses of action. So for those first tasks, you say, are you done with it? Did you encounter a pop-up threat? Are we green for this? And if you get all positive responses, great. You already know that it's going to be a super fast XGAP. If you have some challenges, now you got 48 hours to figure out how you're going to handle those and tweak the resources to be more effective. Maybe even engage the champion at this point and say, hey, we need a little bit extra help, a little bit extra resources if you're really serious about this mission succeeding. Great questions, everyone. This is a great brief. Sorry about the technical issues at the beginning. We had a power failure that we're still recovering from over here at headquarters. But we will make these slides available, and we will share the details from the conversations. We'll release all the questions that we get, besides the ones that contain private business information. And I want to invite everybody to join us on our next webinar. Our next webinar is about how do you create the elite team? What's the best team size? If I want to have the team that is going to go out there and execute effectively, is it 20 people? Is it 30 people? Is it 10 people? Spoiler alert, it's going to be a little less than you think probably. It's going to be optimal size for your group. So we need to figure out, if we do have more people than the optimal size, how do we facilitate the conversation so everyone gets a voice, so everyone feels heard, there's no loafers on the team, we have clear roles and responsibilities for action. We're going to talk about that on Thursday, February 16th at 1:30 p.m. We'll see you there. Thanks for your time.